Welcome to the Ellevate podcast, conversations with women changing the face of business. And now your hosts, Kristy, Wallace, and Maricella, Herrera.
Hello and welcome to the Ellevate podcast. This is your host, Kristy Wallace, with my co-host, Maricella, Herrera.
Maricella, it's great to connect with you virtually again today. Still missing having you next to me when we tape these intros, but how's everything going? How you doing?
I'm doing okay. Yeah, it's so weird being kind of on our own somewhere and not being able to see your face. Maybe we should do this with video at some point, but not being able to see your face as we're talking. Now that I'm used to being in like tiny rooms recording intros.
Exactly. We went from being so close to so far away. We're on up. I'm in Brooklyn. You're in Manhattan.
Far. How are you doing with everything?
I'm hanging in there. Every day is a new day, but I set up a little desk that looks out the window on our street, and that's nice. It's like I see people in cars or walking by to the grocery store and feels a little bit connected. But I'm good. I also have really been enjoying some of the virtual meetings and events and meetups that have been happening. I know, the team has just blown me away with how quickly they have moved many of our events online. Creating community during this time is increasingly so important. This week, I had the great pleasure of leading an executive roundtable, so leading a virtual event for many of the senior women in the Ellevate community. And a topic that is top of mind to many is exactly what our guest today, Winnie Lerner, Finsbury, is going to be talking about. And it's really this crisis communication. How do we, as leaders and organizations, respond in times of crisis? How do we manage and navigate this time? What are some of those best practices, and when do you tap into external resources for that support and guidance as well? So, I know as a business leader, I'm really thinking about what this time means for our business and for our work that we do and how we best support our community. And this is top of mind for them too. So it was such an honor to speak with Winnie and have her on the podcast.
Yeah, it's interesting how we all react in these times, right? And you have to know how to communicate externally, how to communicate with your internal stakeholders. And yeah, it's something I think a lot of the people in our community are really thinking about at this moment because we've never lived something like this.
All right, well, let's get to my conversation with Winnie and hear what she has to say. Winnie, thank you so much for joining us today on the Ellevate podcast.
Thank you, Kristy, so much for inviting me to participate in this. I'm really excited about the next hour or so of our conversation.
Absolutely. So, Winnie, tell me a little bit about what it means to be a managing partner at Finsbury. What do you do every day, and how did you get to this place in your career?
Sure. I'd be very happy to. I'll start with the last question first and then work up to what I do on a daily basis, which, of course, in this environment of coronavirus that we're living in has changed considerably over the past couple of weeks. I spent, I'd say, the beginning of my professional career working in politics. I worked for a presidential campaign. Luckily, fell into that right after college, in large part, because I'm from New Hampshire. And of course, because New Hampshire still has the first primary, there's a lot of need for people that are interested in politics. And I was lucky enough to work on a campaign for Senator Bob Kerrey, who, as you may recall, ran against Clinton in 92. This goes way back now. But it was a wonderful experience and led me to Washington, D.C., where I worked on Capitol Hill for a few years. And then when the composition of Congress shifted in 1994, I came up to New York, and working on Capitol Hill, you think sort of politics is going to be your life, but somebody made the persuasive argument to me that there's a lot that you learn working on a campaign and in politics that's relevant to communications, which was frankly a world I didn't necessarily know existed now to the extent that I do. And was lucky enough to get a job working at a different firm, which does work very similar to the work that we do at Finsbury, the strategic communications support for corporations and organizations. So I got my start there and was there for many, many years, and then had a brief moment where I dropped out of agency and went to the corporate side. I joined Ralph Lauren running global communications for a couple of years. They were a long-term client of mine, and there was a great moment of opportunity for me to join. And so I got a glimpse of what it was like to be on the corporate side, not just advising corporations, and also to learn a bit about the fashion world, which was terrific and a really great time in my professional career. So to fast forward then to today at Finsbury, I'm a managing partner, which means that I spend the vast majority of my time on client work. It's really what we all like to do. I work with a wide array of companies across many different industries, helping them to think about how to use communications to support their business goals in the simplest terms possible.
Well, I'm interested to know how that role has changed and shifted in the past few weeks. We're in the middle of a global pandemic, or maybe not the middle, certainly having a huge impact on the markets, on business, and how we approach, communicating with our customers, with our partners, with the greater world. And so how has your role shifted? What are you seeing? I know that's kind of a big question, but would love to know, what that looks like right now.
Everything has changed, I think, for everybody in all possible ways. And it's interesting because I think, if I personalize it for a moment, and then I'll get to the more important issue, which is how this is affecting, the sort of operation and the world that we're working in and living in. Of course, we all had to transition home. I chose to stay home about a week and a half ago, maybe 2 weeks ago now. And that meant for me personally that I also had to import my teenage children home from college. And so we've got a lot of us kind of underfoot right now. But personally, everyone's existence has had to change on a dime. And we're really in the first, to your point, not knowing where we are in the cycle, we're in the very first phase of that. And so what we're finding, to sort of extrapolate my experience now into what we're talking about within our own organization, and then, I'll talk a bit about what we're talking about with clients. Within our own organization, everyone's having a very different experience of what working from home means for them. I'm lucky in that I've got people around me. So sometimes it's a little bit too much, but right now it's where we haven't throttled one another yet. And I've got some space to move around. But a lot of people within our organization, are younger people who often have, quite a few roommates and don't have proper working space. So when I think about what we've been focused on at Finsbury, we've been, in the immediate term, in the immediate aftermath of being told that we needed to transition to home, we spent a lot of time focusing on how we could allow, especially the younger people within the office who often have, roommates and don't necessarily have proper working space, how we could really accommodate them so that they can continue to do their jobs, but be comfortable at the same time. We're really lucky in that we had a culture that wasn't used to working from home, but a lot of people did work virtually and could work virtually. So it wasn't completely an unusual circumstance for us. But because of what's going on in the broader environment, obviously nobody can really leave home. We're based in New York City. We've got offices around the country and globally, metro area by metro area, cities are starting to shut down. So we really focused in the immediate term on thinking about our own employees and how we can make their living situations as convenient as possible. And also to think on their behalf about the need, which I think we'll see more of in the coming days, to attend to their own well-being and their families' well-being. And that will mean, I'm sure over time, that people in our organization will either themselves or know somebody who becomes sick and who they will have to, they can't necessarily attend to them physically, but will have to be attentive to. And that will, potentially change things for us as a company. As I think about how we've been advising clients, so Kristy, back to your question, we've really been sending some of the same signals to them as it relates to the top priority, which is to be sure that their employees, their customers, any of the audiences that matter to them are taken care of, that their well-being is first and foremost in terms of their priorities, and that they're safe and as sound as possible. And that's been, I think, is because we're still in the early days of this, that's really been the focus of our attention in terms of what we've been advising our clients to think about.
So I want to ask a few kind of balance framing questions here. When you were talking about, internal communications, your internal stakeholders, and then external communications to your customers and the broader public, is there some right percentage of balance between those two? I mean, where are you spending your time and energy as a business leader?
So as a business leader, if I think about this internally for Finsbury as a starting point, we've been spending about 80% of our time focusing on how we can be sure that our employees are as safe and sound as possible. And that's meant a lot of things. For example, we have, for better or for worse, been trying to stay as in close contact as we can, which has meant a lot of video conferencing. And for many of us who, when we're at home on weekends, don't roll out of the bed and get showered and put on our work clothes right away, it's meant that we've had to see one another in, less than ideal circumstances. But that's okay. Everybody's been very, I think, comfortable with the fact that we are living through unprecedented times and need to just be as authentic as we can with one another. So we've been doing a lot of video conferencing, a lot of finding other ways to be connected. For example, we have a number of digital platforms where we share, funny videos or memes or articles about working from home. There's been tons of those I'm sure you've seen as well. We also have been doing virtual happy hours. We have one coming up later this afternoon where everybody will get on a video conference together and just chat about what they've been doing and what they've been up to. We have been asking people to spend time to read to other colleagues' children. We have a lot of young parents in our organization who are home with their young children. And it's been very, very difficult for them to attend to their day jobs when they are trying to, navigate parenting at the same time. So we've been asking people to virtually volunteer to read to their children and try to give the parents a little bit of a break. We've been working with those parents to see if we can come up with schedules for them so that it's clear to all of our colleagues when they are available to do work and when they need time to focus on their children. And we've been absolutely as respectful as we can certainly be to know that people need time to take walks. They need time to get out of their houses, their apartments. They need time to spend time with their children and families and to talk to their extended families on the phone. It's been a very new dynamic I think we've all been working under because of the circumstances that are required. We do a lot of crisis communications work, which means that we all signed up for this, so we all know what it is, but our lives are very unpredictable by nature. We walk into the office every morning, normally walk into an office, and we don't know what the day will hold. We really work for our clients. Our clients will call us, unexpectedly at any hour of the day with something that they need. They may need support by way of, a crisis that's emerged. There may be a cyber issue or a Me Too issue or a leadership issue. It may be that there is a transaction that's pending. It may be that they have, something that's happened to an employee or a product recall. And we are available to our clients at all moments. And really, in many ways, that means for our personal schedules and even professional schedules, that we lead very unpredictable lives. This now in this environment is requiring us to be a lot more intentional and I think, scheduled in terms of how we're leading our daily existence. And that doesn't always jive well with the work that we do every day.
Sure, that makes complete sense. And I know, speaking from personal experience, it's hard when you live and work and take care of others potentially in one space. And how do you create the transitions from one existence to the next? Or, how do you really set boundaries? Which, many of us who are accustomed to working in an office are figuring out. You mentioned that, you could walk into the office or get to your computer and a client comes and they're dealing with a crisis. Can you walk me through maybe some of the more general, what are the questions, what are the framings that you use to understand how to address this crisis?
Of course. So, as an organization, as I mentioned, we do a lot of crisis communications work. That's really our legacy. We also do a lot of work with the organizations focused on capital markets, corporate reputations, and employee change. So those are the general areas that how we're organized as a firm. At our core, we call ourselves a strategic communications advisory firm. But on the subject of crisis in particular, we operate in, and this is even setting aside the current circumstances, we operate in an ever-changing environment where companies are constantly facing, serious, complex issues that can, if not managed well, damage even the strongest reputations. I mentioned some of the types of crises that we help companies to navigate through. And they change all the time. This was not one that I think anybody would have estimated would be something that we're working with companies to support. I would have said the same about 9/11, for example, when I was at my old firm. And I remember not really knowing what to do with myself and showing up to work a day or two after. And we were sent to one of the hardest hit financial services firms that was in the Twin Towers, who said, can you please just help us? And the first thing that we were asked to do was to help gather the items that family members brought in that had DNA of people that were missing and organize those. That isn't necessarily something that we were specifically qualified to do. But as communications professionals who are trained in many ways to help our clients and the executives that we work with navigate through crises, that's, we show up and we help them think about how best to manage through these situations. That was a very acute example. This is another very acute example. Normally the crises that we help through are not quite as transcendent as those. But to answer your question specifically, Kristy, the things that we do when a company calls and says, okay, we have a really tough situation here. We were not expecting it. We need someone to help us think about how to strategize and make it through this. The first thing that we suggest companies do is we really work with them quickly to rapidly assess their needs. What's the nature of the situation? How do we learn as much as possible about what has happened and transpired here? And how do we inventory what the immediate issues are? So that's really the first step. The second step then is to formulate a strategy, to identify how we're going to help that organization navigate through that situation. So if it's a product recall, for example, the first order of business may be to say, let's understand the supply chain and where it is that this product may have reached, which audiences, how did it get there, who are the potential, customers and others that may have access to this. How do we implement a recall in a perfect world as quickly as possible? And how do we identify where within our own supply chain and manufacturing facilities this happened and address those issues as quickly as possible? So assessing the client, assessing the immediate needs, formulating then a strategy once you've done that and you have some containment in place to navigate through that situation. So that's really where communications comes in. How do we then communicate? If we take the example of the product recall, how do we communicate to the right people in a way that enables them to understand that we have taken immediate action and steps and are addressing the situation as quickly as possible? Who are those individuals? How do we best reach them? Who within the organization is responsible for getting to those people? How do we gather together and be sure that we all are working from the same playbook, have a single person in charge of this, and can implement this as quickly and effectively as possible? And then part 3 is really to think a bit more long-term about how to address whatever flaws were in place or, may have happened to us in some instances that will remediate the situation so that it, in a perfect world, it can't happen again. Or at least we mitigate it so that it's very unlikely to happen again. So part 3 is really to think about how we can use the tools at our disposal to be sure that we are that we A, are fixing the issue, of course, and B, then can communicate that we have fixed the issue. So those are really the 3 steps that we would take when clients come through the front door and say, I've got a real issue. I've got something that is, potentially hugely problematic to my organization, and I need help in navigating through it.
So that all sounds really like a strong process, right? And you're touching on many aspects of, the whole trajectory around communication and how to manage and mitigate it. But when does it go wrong? Like, do you see the obvious mistakes that happen, or is it not moving fast enough? Is it something else that tends to derail these efforts?
Yes, it's a really good question. And, there are so many ways that these things can go wrong. There's a few principles I would say that that companies need to abide by. And if not, things can really go off the rails. I mean, number one, there needs to be a centralized group of people or person in a perfect world who is managing the effort overall. And that means operationally, legally, from a communication standpoint, there needs to be a group of people who know that they are part of a crisis group, that if something were to happen, that they can come together extremely quickly. They all have responsibility to reach different audiences, and there is a central way to communicate with one another and one person who's in charge of making decisions. Because to your point, if decision making is, if it's done by committee, organizations tend to like to operate by consensus many times. And I think management teams like to have the input of many people in the room. And that's a good thing, but it has to happen very quickly, and decisions have to be made extremely quickly. So having that core group of people with a central decision maker is principle number one. Number two is to be sure that the organization has thought through some of these issues beforehand so that they know how to manage them when something happens. And we do a lot of work with companies to help them think about not only their vulnerabilities and where they may be at risk for having a potential crisis emerge, but also how they would manage through it. This is some of the most interesting work that we do, but we do a lot of work with companies to really test drive what a reaction would be to a situation, so that they know that they are properly synced up internally, that they know how to reach. For example, can you reach all of your customers? If you know how to reach at least as many of the end customers as possible, can you get to those people as quickly as possible? Do you know how to access them? Can it be done very quickly? Can you communicate with all of your employees? Many of the clients we work with have employees who are in the field who are not necessarily easy to communicate with. How will you get to them if something critical occurs that requires, real-time communication? Internally, can you be certain that all of the senior managers are properly connected so that they know who is responsible for connecting with other audiences, and that they can be properly connected themselves, so that there is perfect synchronicity when something happens? And I would say that the third thing, and where there's really risk of things going off the rails, is when companies don't take the time to identify what constitutes a situation that can be managed maybe at the lower levels before it escalates to management, versus something that escalates to management and then can be a huge distraction for the organization. So in other words, sometimes companies will call us and say, oh God, we have this major crisis. It really threatens our reputation. And we, the entire management team wants to get on a call to talk about it. We will suggest to them that we start with a smaller group, understand the nature of the situation, and think through how we can address it before we have to engage, for example, entire management team on the situation. So really having those roles and responsibilities defined ahead of time is important. We've seen a lot of situations where, understandably, CEOs and others want to know what's happening, but they have a business to run. And the management teams need to know that they are responsible for continuing to do their day jobs, and let the people who are in charge of managing the situation manage it, and come to them if there are any questions or concerns or major decisions that have to be made.
Absolutely. What about external communications? We touched on it a little bit earlier, but something that many business leaders are struggling with right now is how to balance being authentic and real and honest in your communications, but then also continuing to drive your business and your business KPIs. What are the ways that our leaders and our community should be responding from the external communication standpoint?
Yeah, it's a really good question. And we grapple with this a lot, because companies, especially the corporate America, I mean, as you well know, the voice that they tend to use is very sterile. It tends to be legalistic, and it doesn't necessarily, especially if there's a major situation which requires the management team to be communicating, doesn't always sound like it's coming from a person. It sounds like it's coming from a legal team or a corporation without a face. It is a fine balance that you have to strike between conveying information in a very direct and credible way, but while also trying to humanize it a bit. And it really depends upon the nature of the situation, how far you go in allowing the CEO, for example, to really bring her or his voice to the situation, so that it's really truly being conveyed as something that is coming from them directly. I think that, what I've seen, I've been doing this now for a long time. I think that the pendulum, again, setting aside the COVID world we're in, the pendulum has swung much more towards the need to have CEOs and senior managers, convey important things to their customers, employees, to investors through their own voices. I think previously there was a view that there was risk associated with it, and that maybe they didn't want to have, they didn't want to necessarily be as invested personally in some of these communications as they should be. And I think the pendulum has swung not too far, but I think to a proper place. And so they are willing to put themselves much more, to personally engage much more with major decisions and communications. Also, technology's changed a lot, and that means that they can do a lot more with video. They can do a lot more digitally. We're all human beings. It's so much more impactful and so much more interesting to hear directly from another human being about something that, may be kind of corporate and boring in nature, but we just respond as humans much more naturally to that. And it's taken a while, but I think corporate America has really seen the value in putting their senior managers out there to communicate directly and personally with their stakeholders, which is great.
I couldn't agree more. I love it when a leader is authentic and part of the conversation, and really leading the way from that standpoint. When you were talking about the framework earlier, one thing you mentioned is kind of that end step, which is you solve the problem and you communicate the problem's been solved. But we are living in a time of such uncertainty, and the landscape is changing. We're not sure where we're headed. And so during this time when the end isn't clear, are there ways that businesses should be preparing from a communication standpoint, and preparing internally with their community, externally for the unknowns, and setting themselves up to react quickly as things unfold?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'm not sure I have a perfect answer right now since we are in the middle of it. But I will say that if we take a step back and think about the approach that we recommend, just in any kind of of an acute crisis moment like this. Again, the first priority, especially in this situation, is to focus on the safety and well-being of employees, customers, and others, and make sure that they know that they've got the time and the support from their employers to attend to themselves and attend to their families. So that is, more than ever, priority number one. I think that the second thing that's really important, especially now, is to think about, companies need to think about how they can be supporting others who perhaps aren't in their immediate line of sight, who are going to be potentially, collateral in all of this. What about the people that work in the buildings who aren't employees of these organizations, but help to clean the offices at night or deliver lunch to their employees? There's so many of these workers now that we're seeing. We just saw this morning that the unemployment numbers have skyrocketed. 3.3 million people applied for unemployment support. It's absolutely unprecedented. It's multiples of what we've ever seen before. And that means that there's a lot of people out there who suddenly are not able to work and may not have jobs to go back to. So while we, corporate America can't necessarily solve for that in the immediate term, we've been spending time talking to our clients about things that they can do to support those people. There's a lot of conversations happening around how best to help support those people that are part of their ecosystem, but aren't necessarily direct employees of the organizations. And the other thing I'd say is, and this is what a lot of companies are absolutely doing right now, is scenario planning. It's really hard to do, not knowing, what the stimulus package will allow for, and when the markets will stabilize, and when, in the United States at least, we will, kind of hit the peak of this and begin to come back down. But in the meantime, companies have to spend time scenario planning and think about all of the different possibilities of how they can manage through this cycle and come out on the other side. And for many, that means, preserving as much capital as possible so that they are thinking very carefully about their capital structure and how best to navigate through this so that they can truly come out the other side. For many, it's thinking about how they can be supportive of their employees to, get through this period of time. We're starting to see, furloughs begin in companies that have said, we want to have you come back, but we just can't afford to pay you right now. How then can they at least get them through that period by potentially, providing benefits and other forms of support that will allow them to come back once the economy has been kickstarted again.
Thank you for those tips. We're all trying to understand what are the steps to take. How do we be proactive about mapping this out for our businesses and taking the appropriate steps? And it's a different framework for that, right? You're proactively responding to a crisis that's affecting your business, but affecting so many others. And how do you be more of a driver of positive change in those times?
Yeah, that's right. And, one thing that I think we've been talking to companies about and they're grappling with is what is the right thing to do? Is the right thing to do to take steps to be sure that they can preserve their business so that they can be back in business at some point for the benefit of their employees and, all the extended audiences and people that matter to that business? Or is it to, for now, throw caution to the wind and say, we just need to do what we can to support our employees, and we'll hope that we may be able to secure, some kind of financial support or something that will get us back into business. Those are, existential questions and really incredibly important and difficult questions that management teams are thinking about and don't necessarily have answers to. I mean, there's no precedent for this. We were coming off of very, very well-functioning market and economy, and now to revert to this so quickly has meant that, as much as I said that we spend time with companies scenario planning and thinking about their vulnerabilities, this was nothing that anyone could have ever considered would have been a reality for them. It's really difficult for these organizations to think about what their responsibility is to their stakeholders and how they best accomplish that.
Absolutely. Well, Winnie, thank you so much for joining us on the Ellevate podcast. I wanted to ask a couple lightning round questions to close it out by getting to know you a little bit better. So, Winnie, introvert or extrovert?
Extrovert.
What's your favorite day of the week?
Saturday.
Are you an early bird or a night owl?
So much a night owl.
Who's your dream dinner guest?
Alive? Right now, I'd say Angela Merkel. Lots of questions for her. Dead? I would say Janis Joplin or Princess Diana.
So good. Good ones. What's your pet peeve?
A pet peeve is when people don't take accountability for their decisions.
Your Monday morning staple. So much must have activity, food, drink, whatever.
Excessive amounts of coffee.
Me too. Although that is Monday through Sunday, every day. Your favorite recent read?
I just finished At the Stranger's Gate by Adam Gopnik. It's a great read about New York City if you love New York City, like I do.
Oh, I do too. I will have to pick it up. Your top self-care practice?
Running.
And what is a final thought you want to leave with our listeners today?
Have people think about, in this moment, how they can try to convey empathy, which is, perhaps an overused term right now, but it feels like it's never been more important. Conveying empathy to people that are afflicted by this, could be afflicted by this, and just need our individual support.
Excellent. Winnie, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much. It was a real pleasure, and I really appreciate the time, Kristy.
Thanks so much for listening to Ellevate. If you like what you hear, help a girl out. Subscribe to the Ellevate podcast on iTunes, give us 5 stars, and share your review. Also, don't forget to follow us on Twitter at EllevateNTWK, that's Ellevate Network, and become a member. You can learn all about membership and all the great things that Ellevate Network is doing at our website, www.ellevatenetwork.com. That's ELLEVATE network.com. And special thanks to our producer, Catherine Heller. She rocks. And to our voiceover artist, Rachel Griesinger. Thanks so much, and join us next week.